and welcome back to No Capes, the show where we talk about creator-owned comics with creators who own comics. Now, today's episode is a bit of a strange one because I made a mistake during the recording, and so my audio is missing for 95% of the video. I'm in the process of ADRing myself, and it's going to look like a bad kung fu movie dub from the 80s. In the meantime, you're going to have to read the captions in the speech bubble, just like this one over here, and I will be updating the video as soon as I finish ADRing it, and the audio only version for the podcast on Spotify will go up as soon as that ADRing is done as well. In the meantime, enjoy my captions and my guest Ryan K Lindsay's dulcet tones while we talk about once and future. Thanks for watching.
Hey man, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I've always appreciated you mentioning any of the comics that I write. Hopefully, some people have checked them out or will want to check them out. But I've written a variety of different creator-owned comics through Dark Horse and Black Mask and Comics Tribe. Titles such as Negative Space with ONGNE, Eternal, the graphic novel, which I have a poster of on my wall here, with Eric Zavadsky, and with Sammy Cavella, I have done Beautiful Canvas and Dear Editor and CHUM and Everfrost. So certainly very passionate about creator-owned comics myself and wanting to tell those sorts of stories, but just love reading them. I would say they're about 90% of the literature that I imbibe at the moment. There's so much good stuff out there. Yeah. Volume 3, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're putting out good stuff. They continue to attract a bunch of really good creators too. Yeah. I'm sure they will be. No, it's one of those things where like we've been messaging. I mean, we've been messaging about me coming on the show for like literally years now. And then I was like, all right, what am I going to talk about? And just trying to think of all the cool stuff that's out there and all the sort of things I slowly wanted to narrow it down to. It was exceptionally hard, to be honest. It was. Mm, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, looking at that list, I was like, oh, I could talk about this. Oh, it'd be really cool to talk about this. And just like, yeah, I sent you a few suggestions. But it was nice to sort of like, we're going to borrow in on one that I don't know. I've got sort of like multiple thoughts on this comic, which is kind of cool. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was one where so I've only just recently read I'd read the first three trades that are all the trades that are out of Once and Future by Dan Mora illustrating it, who just seems to be like perfectly formed, like as an artist. Like he knows exactly what he's doing with every single page. And yeah, it's to the point where it almost feels cliche at the moment, where people are like, "Oh, Dan Moore is such an amazing artist," but you read this and you just go, "Man, he truly is such an amazing artist. Like it's phenomenal." And with Tamara Bonvillain coloring, um, every scene just like they all just feel almost like poster worthy. Like it's just really gorgeous to like lose yourself in, which kind of then again kind of matches the story because we're dealing with these like legends of old and we're dealing with this like truly epic scope. And that's where I found Once and Future to be a really interesting book because having only just read it recently, it obviously meant it's been out like I would estimate that it must have been out 2 years now, if they're up to like issue 20 odd. And I hadn't dived in initially, and it was because I truly didn't know what the book was about. Now I blame COVID, but that's a pretty easy blame for everything, right? But I also blame just like I take in so much less social media, so my finger on the pulse is far less medical. I'll be honest, but it was one of those things where I was like, oh, okay, so it's like you look at the cover and I'm like, all right, it's definitely about swords and there's monsters and there's like a dude and his grandmother, but I just really didn't delve any deeper than that. And so I just started reading it purely basically on Kieran Gillen. Like I knew the art was going to be solid. I knew it was going to be amazing. You could just tell that from a little slice of social media. But Kieran Gillen's one of those writers where I just trust. Like the dude is intensely smart. He thinks about story. He thinks about comics and construction. Like he's not just sort of spewing IP into the world. He's truly mastering the craft of this medium. And so I kind of just knew, like, with everything that he does, that he's definitely going to be doing something interesting, if nothing else, but probably something pretty fantastic, and really wasn't let down. I mean, I read those 3 trades in about 4 days. It's just one of the most readable comics that just flows and engages, but you can also slow down on like specific moments and pages and just soak in like the color or the like some of the lines that Gillen gets in there. Very clever stuff. But ultimately, yeah, the point I was trying to make, I guess, was like I didn't know it was about a lady who was like a monster hunter and was kind of like keeping almost like stories from bleeding into this world, stories and legends from manifesting, and she's done her dash on that, and things have been pretty good, and then it all starts to rise up again, and so she enlists her grandson. um yeah, yeah, mm, yeah, yeah, oh yeah, 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 yeah. It's keeping everything flowing, like entire pages just kind of look beautiful, mystical as they weave. It's a whole team just crushing it. Mm. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, cheers, man. That's a huge compliment. It's one of those things that I like. A few of my comics, like SkyScraper, was one, which was that big newspaper size, like one shot that I did on Kickstarter. I had a few people go to me, "Oh, I needed to read it like 2 more times to really get it," and I was like, "That's good. That's a compliment. That's like, I mean, it's like 24-page newspaper. If you have to read 1,000-page novel 3 times to get it, that might be stretching it." But it got me thinking about it, even like when I watched like Tenet by Christopher Nolan, which I don't think is a it's not a perfect film. I don't know what it is, but I know that I watched it, I enjoyed the experience, and I got hours of conversation out of it, and I'd be keen to watch it again. And I actually don't think that that's necessarily a flaw or a fault. I think that that's a feature of the system that he built. And if you don't like that, then that's totally fine. that's subjective, but it doesn't make the film bad. And I think that about a lot of comics sometimes, where I'm like, no, no, sometimes it'll drop you into the story and you've got to like sink or swim. And if you need to flick back a page, well, comics is great. You can easily do that. And you're just sort of getting more bang for your buck. And if at the end it's completely incomprehensible, then something has failed. But otherwise, it's cool. Oh, yeah. Ah, nice. Yeah. 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 It's time to go. Ah, that sucks. Yeah, I think just seeding what you need and hinting at stuff that you might not necessarily need, but that you can move on from. Um, I think it's a power in a story that's really engaging for the right sort of reader, and I think that Kieran Gillen attracts a readership that wants to think. They want to like analyze. They want to dive in. They want to be challenged. Um, and I mean, throughout this comic, you gotta pay a little bit of attention. Everything's there. At no point do I think you're being misled in ones in future, but you just gotta like just soak it up. Mm, mm, yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, that's a cool page. I mean, even just her eyes in the bottom panel, like it's such a cool compositional thing, and you've got the scabbard like pointing at her in this almost like menacing way. Even just like the line like I do, and the two ways to take that line. There's like the wedding sort of our way where she's like super committing to something, and then there's just the do you have any ideas? Well, yeah, I do. There's like the literal aspect of it. But I like taking it in that like that lifelong commitment way where she's just like, I do, but she doesn't look stoked about it. Like this is almost like a painful quest for her. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, this is a big next step, and there's no faltering. Mm. Yeah, I found that the opening scene really like it's cold open, and we've got our sort of villain turning up and taking this scabbard, and it sort of you could see it being the start of a film in that it would be like a 2-minute open right before the credits, which is sort of exactly how it happens. It feels really different to the rest of the comic, and it was one of the things the more I read it, the more I kept going back to that opening scene. It feels like a very standard opening scene for what then becomes a fairly bonkers comic. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things that the more I thought about this comic, the more I was like, oh, it's so hard to pin down because it kind of like part of it feels like some sort of like successor to Goonies, and that it's like this real high octane action thing, but then it does get dark and there is some pretty gnarly violence to it. So then I'm like, all right, so it's more from Goonies to Raiders of the Lost Ark to this, but then it's also about, family. There's some really cool like elements of aside from like the genre part of it, it's about like generational layers of information as well as generational views of hope that you sort of see come through within this first arc at least. And I sort of look at all scenes as to how they're serving the greater purpose, but I feel like each of the scenes is serving its purpose and that they all end up interlocking. And I think that that's really cool that it has this, like as you said, like total treasure hunting adventure action sequence as an opening, but then we cut to a nursing home straight away into the next scene, and it's just like, all right, it's almost like it's trying to put you off what you think is going to happen, and I love that. Mm, yeah, it's a. It makes me wonder then if the grandmother and Duncan are meant to feel a little more whimsical, but we want the villains to feel like more of a genuine threat. Because at the end of that opening sequence, it's like, what do you want? The guy says England back. And you're like, oh, okay, so we're dealing with some really like nationalistic views. Like this isn't just like I'm after money or something like that. It's this weird like jingoistic pride. And so we never really see the villains as being too goofy. They're this credible threat, but then we come at them with vampire hunting, monster slaying grandma. And I think to find that balance, I think if the whole book had the tone of monster hunting grandmother, it probably wouldn't work. So I would assume Gillen's sort of going for a bit of a balance on that one. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, there's still that weight behind it. Because I love, like, I mean, in 3 panels they introduce the grandmother, and one of them's just an establishing shot of the nursing home. But what does she say? She's like, You can change the channel if you really want, but broken fingers take so long to heal at our age." That's an exceptional line to be coming out of some nice little old lady's mouth, and everyone else in the room is just kind of like, they're not pushing her on it. They're all just like grumble, 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 but no one's calling it out. And you get a sense of like the vibe in that room instantly. Yeah. Yeah, no, she's like she can control a room with like her secondary actions and thoughts while everything else is like spinning up front, which is obviously how she operated very well for a long time as this sort of guardian role back in the day, which is kind of cool. Yeah, and it's cool because that's on the second page. He's kind of like, and she like looks up with a very kind of like sweet face. I think the design of her of Bridget is really good because she looks old, but she doesn't look like frail or infirm, but she also is like a small human, and so there's just that size worry. But then she's able to carry herself, but ultimately, like her power at this stage is her mind. It's her willingness to do things instantly. It's her willingness to react. It's how she knows and thinks about things. Um, but yeah, I think her visual and her hair is phenomenal. Like just got to take like 10 minutes out to just marvel at Dan Moore's design on her hair. It's so cool. Mm, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. It's amazingly like the characters instantly emote on their first like panel. You get a sense of of who they are, and what they would sound like, and what it would be like to like be in a room with them. I think the date scene between Duncan and, I'm forgetting her name. I'm trying to see if it's on one of the pages. Is really is really well set up to give us a lot of information. I mean, just on like you're instantly introduced to him as like being like, "I'm sorry," and his face doesn't just look sorry; it looks horrified. It looks so scared and upset and worried, and you're just like, "Oh, okay." And she just looks, and I like that she looks very annoyed. But by the end of the scene, you get a fleshed out picture of her. I totally, yeah. Yeah, it's not like that's it. She sort of keeps engaging. She assumes this is all this date's going to go one way. And I thought it was really clever that she basically like sums Duncan up by being like, my friends had told me about you, and I wondered why. What did she say? Single rugby playing academic Duncan, and I'm like, wow, that's a lot of information. Because seeding in that rugby playing allows me to accept every physical thing he does from then on. Yeah. No, he's just so timid. You expect him to be like my size, and instead he's like he has this physicality, but he's still like a really sweet sort of, yeah. Mm, yeah. And you get that balance, and so she's kind of like, all right, I think I'm starting to understand you. And then he gets like the phone call saying that his grandmother's gone missing, and and instantly the whole like scene starts to shift, and you see her warm to Duncan a little bit, and we get to see a bit more about Duncan and his connection, mostly through like a lot of his facial expressions, which is phenomenal. Yeah, 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 yeah. That's how clever is that to give two pieces of information in one panel, though, to give like who's calling without the need for a caption being like, oh, now it's my grandmother, and then just the face reflected on the phone. Like really, really clever. Like I think that's exceptional artwork. I'd love to see if that's in the script or not. That's they're the moments where I'm always like, all right, who led the charge on that one? Just just out of curiosity, because it's phenomenal. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's Yeah, it's throwing him for a loop. And in that same page, it starts with her being like really cranky, and then her face sort of like opens up, and she's like, "Oh God, that's awful." And then she's just kind of like caring. Like in three panels, you see her kind of like buy into sort of who Duncan is, because she gets to see him being real straight away, even though she's still covered in red wine. Like that's all to the side now. She's just like, oh, what are you gonna do? And so like instantly, I buy their connection. Yeah, and I want to know where it's gonna go. Mm. Yeah, yeah. And what really matters. So yeah, so we're three scenes in, and we've basically been introduced to like our villain and our matriarch of the tale, and then Duncan and someone who is probably going to matter to him. And each of those three scenes has like a different tone and feel to them. We have that stock standard kind of like action beginning. We have this kind of like bubbling mystery, like not nastiness isn't the right word, but of the grandma, almost like this like duplicity of like she's almost like two people in that scene. She's badass and grandmother, and everyone associates grandmother with like loving and caring, and she looks the part. And then we have Duncan, and we get this like terrible date. Like, let's call it. Like, it's not ideal for anybody, but no. It's in fact, I just want to go back. Like, I don't see any food on the table. Like, we haven't gotten to the meal yet, and he's already like, all right, it's gone sideways, and I got to bounce. But she's already in on that. So that's three totally set. Like, you just got to marvel at like, and I try to tell this to students all the time, especially with like introductions, but with everything. I'm like, the creator chose this specifically. Kieran Gillen sat down and was like, what's the best way we can introduce the villain? Because, opening contracts matter. What's the best way that we can introduce Bridget in the nursing home? What's the best way we can introduce Duncan? And these were what he came up with. And they all work really. Like, I'm all in on Bridget and Duncan straight away. One scene each. I'm loving them as separate characters, and they haven't even crossed paths yet, which is probably 50% of the charm of this book. Let's be honest, they're phenomenal together as two generations apart. And with the villain, I'm kind of like I'm interested. I'm probably more interested in the scabbard at this stage, which kind of makes sense because unfortunately for the villain, she she sort of like second strings herself by design, by aiming to bring King Arthur back. And she's sort of secondary in her own scene to a degree. So phenomenal opening to to the comic. Like, I just really marvel at that sort of stuff where creators can use like half an issue to get you in the palm of their hands with what they need to give to you straight away. It's a phenomenal skill. Yeah. Mm, yeah. Mm. Yeah, it gives you tone. Like, it's that's the thing. It just totally sets the vibe up for everything. And so when you've got Dan Mora bringing all of the character and emotion and reaction to the page, and then you've got Tamara bringing all of this tone to the page, it's such a brilliant comic. Like, yeah, yeah, absolute like masterpiece. Well, that's it. Yeah, I don't think she's ever done anything that didn't. But yeah, that page sort of like, so then we cross cut with him talking to grandma, and then end the page with him basically being like, I've got to go. And I the moment she says to him, um, go get your grand, I'm like, oh yeah, these two are good. Yeah, like, yeah. Yeah, and it's kind of not how you expect it to play out, especially from when you meet her in the first panel and she just looks like gorgeous and angry. And I'm like, well, those two things are a very dangerous cocktail. And by the end, she just looks like understanding. She just looks really empathetic. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a pretty cool way to like wrap it up. And so yeah, then we transition across to Duncan looking for grandma. And so then we've got the first opportunity for them to link up. And it's a really cool scene because they are out in the woods and they're finding like this underground cache of weapons that she had stockpiled. It's such a cool like moment. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it says a lot about him, doesn't it? Yeah. You just like, you can't fathom like the twist that would feel like, because the more the story unpacks, he's just like, well, you raised me, and it was just simple and quiet. Like, that's why he's so simple and quiet. Like that's the world, and it all just gets turned around in this moment. Yeah, yeah. There's the normal ones we have in our backyards, and then there's this next level one, which is just it's a bit over the top, which I love. Like he pulls up this giant like gun, and I don't even know why he's touching stuff to be honest. And it's got like all these stakes popping out of it. Yeah, I wouldn't want my fingerprints down in this thing. Yeah, it's super unnerving. But this is where like the writing shines because she's like you see through the interaction again, she's just really matter of fact, where she's just like, all right, I'm just letting him in now, but I'm not gonna make it smooth. It's just gonna be like, well, I used to hunt vampires, that's why I have a stake gun. And I love that he's like, you used to hunt vampires, and her line is like, yeah, I used to, and then I ran out of vampires. It's such a good line where you're like, oh, you're a badass. He's just got like a bit of pride. Yeah, yeah. You can only imagine like there'd be a feeling of like almost repression having to hold it in for like decades of just being like you live this life, this weird monster hunting life, and then suddenly you just like you don't and you raise your grandson. You get a sense maybe like she I think she was like hoping this day wouldn't come, but kept prepared for it the whole time and maybe wanted it. Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing. Yeah, you don't want it to just sort of be forgotten. Yeah, I kind of like that. Even if you had done your due diligence, unlike me, and you kind of knew what this book was about, and so far you'd be like, all right, standard action sequence, all right, nursing home, cool, all right, we've got a bungle date, and then you'd be like, all right, it's probably going to get a little weird, and they're like creating the book, going, no, it's not going to get a little weird, it's going to get a lot of weird. Yeah, it's a throw us like real deep end. No, you do. Yeah, yeah. Mm. It seems like it seems like a design flaw, I'll admit, but it depends on what you expect to happen in the weird dog sack, or where the access point is, or whether there's like like yeah, it's just one of those things where I just remember turning to this page and seeing the questing beast and just sort of going like, oh, okay, this book's like bonkers. I'm like, all right, I thought it was going to be like a little bit funky, but I got to here and I was like, oh no, we're like we're not just showing like some like mashed up chimera creature, we're showing like an udder full of dark barking dogs, and you go, oh, okay, all right, expect anything moving forward. Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Like, because then also I was like, oh, well, you're probably gonna see King Arthur. I bet he looks dapper, and yeah, like that's so like you read enough Arthurian legend, I would assume King Arthur's a bit of a good-looking, salty fella. And no, that's not what this book is going to be like. Duncan is our good-looking fella. King Arthur's going to be like villainous. And so yeah, I think that this questing beast thing is a nice way of saying to the audience, like, hold on to your boots. It's it's going to be a really weird ride. And again, such a smart storytelling choice to to put it in there. Oh yeah, I I love I yeah. There's so much structurally about this book that I love because then I'm like, all right, well, what tone are we setting with this? And in the end, it's just like this book's going to be a few different tones. It's going to be lots of different things, but you'll know what it is in each scene. And I think that that's key. You're never going to be confused as to what you are reading on that page in that moment. Yeah. Yeah. You're never going to guess it. Mm, yeah. And that shows so much mastery. So yeah, so then we get the questing beasts attacking, and I mean, it doesn't hurt to have a bit of action in each comic, and so they seed it in. Yeah, which which was one of those. Yeah, I had to keep like harkening back and being like, well, no, he's like, because you're led with this like he's timid and he knocks over red wine, but I'm like, no, there's don't forget, there's rugby player, there's academic, like he's also a sharp dude. He's like, he's yeah, yes, yeah. Mm. Yeah, he can rise to it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm. Yeah. It's a really cool sequence in that it visually looks good. It shows us a lot about Duncan. It shows us a lot about his grandma as well, because she's kind of like barking orders and she's just getting on with her job, which is to find whatever it was she was looking for. Like again, everything's like serving a purpose here and looking gorgeous. It's utterly phenomenal. And so you have him eventually like she's like lead it back here and he just like stands before this beast and it's it's heroic realistically. Yeah. 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 He's scrambling. He just scrambles well. Yeah. He's yeah. I like that they steer into that like heroic action but terrified response. Mm. Yeah, yeah. He's not going to freeze on it, but man, it's gonna be hard. It humanizes him. It doesn't like he's not as much as that opening scene was like stock standard adventure treasure hunter action scene, and you think, well, the hero is going to be like the Rock or something. He's not. He gets to be this other sort of really human person, and I think that that's one of the real charms of this book. Yes, yes, this is totally action Cheaty, and Cheaty could do an action film. I could, yeah. Hey, we all saw him with the shirt off. I'd watch that. Yeah, you're like, wow, there's more to this character, and you go, yeah, right on. Yeah, he's a nebulous looking dude. Yes, but can figure out a path of action as well. Yeah, yeah, and he's gonna use it. Yeah, and that's the thing where like if I was teaching this in a class, I'd be talking about there's what you see and there's what you accept on the page, but it helps to have context. And I would just be like, I can imagine being in that situation. Somebody's trying to toss me a spear. I'm probably just out of there. Like I'm I'm gone. Yeah, yeah. Like there would so you got to think about like what would be the normal response, and his is like to be fearful and yet to still sort of like get on with it. And I guess there's an element of there's there's a hero within him. Like you kind of get that sense, especially as the series grows. There just is like he comes from his grandmother's stock. There is obviously like just heroism in his cells, but he's also like he's balanced as a character and willing to protect his grandmother as well. I think there's an element of he's not going to leave her there, and it's not stated. And I kind of like that he's not yelling out like, "Oh, I won't leave you behind." Doesn't need to be like show don't tell. And so through his actions, you get the sense that he's willing to do it. Mm, yeah. Mm, yeah. Yeah. I think he's Percival because I think he steps up to be Gawain, and she takes that mantle. Mm, 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 yeah. 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 The larger. Mm, yeah. It's a cool balance. I like that idea of characters within the story, like finding like a character in the Arthurian legend and filling that form. And then the story will kind of run its course around that structure, but it might be different because they I mean they slowly tie in these things and the characters openly talk about it and they're just like, all right, Beowulf turns up, which happens much later and is exceptional. And as it's happening, they're like, "Well, who knows, like, the story of Beowulf? Like, what are we supposed to do or what's kinda gonna happen?" And what they do or don't know is really cool because then whether you know the story or not, you see how it plays out and you're like, "Oh, okay." So if things slightly change, it's going to be like, "Well, what would happen in Beowulf if this thing happened instead of the other thing?" And stuff like that's really nifty, like, really smart. Yeah. 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 Which one's that? Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes. That's pretty cool. I remember turning to that and being like, "Legally? Is that cool?" And I'm like, "Nah, of course it is." I'd forgotten about that. Yeah. Makes you wonder, well, is that another story that's also being tied in? How deep does this go? And I mean, just the concept that stories are kind of cycles, much like history is cyclic, and these things can keep coming back, but coming back in different forms, almost to the point of like oral traditional stories where they would just slowly change and be refined as they occur. I think that stuff like that's really nifty, and it doesn't matter how much you know or don't know going into these. Like when the Beowulf stuff happens, I'm like, cool, I'm down with Beowulf. When a lot of this Arthurian stuff comes, I'm like, oh, I don't know my Percivals from my Lancelots to a degree that I'm gonna guess a story beat or whatever. But it doesn't matter. They're going to give me enough in the book. Like they're always going to explain just enough to be like, here's what you need to know. And if you know a bit more, you might be one step ahead or you might catch a little something else. But it doesn't really matter because you get the core, which is which is exactly how you need to thread the needle with something like this where you want your audience thinking, but you also need to fill in the gaps because no one can be expected to know everything. Especially when a story like this is informed by so many different things that come through. Oh, that bit that bit kind of like is a kind of confronting moment, but it speaks to them again as a bit of a partnership where I mean it says a lot about her. But even like, she clips him on the ear, I assume, and she's like, nah, you'd get worse than that in a scrum. And so instantly I'm kind of like, yeah, to be fair, like it's a brutal sport. You get hurt a lot and you can bleed. So I'm like, he can probably take it. So it's a really nifty little way of making me buy that. Like, somebody shoots me in the ear, I'm going to be pretty upset. But he kind of takes it instead, and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. And then it's like, yeah, yeah, he can still kind of superhumanly shrug it off. And then she's like, well, my hands aren't as good as they used to be. So I didn't actually mean that. And so you're like, all right, well, on a physical level, he's fine. And on a personal level, he's also probably fine. Like, it's little things like that that make me just go, all right, I buy it. I mean, yeah, I'm not going to question whether they would break down or whatever. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mm, yeah. 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 Mm, yeah. 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 Mm. Yeah, it's a clever subversion of what, we would generally think. I think that that's super well done. Yeah, totally. Who knew that history would be written by the winners? God, that's crazy. Yeah, yeah. It's pretty cool. I like it when she's like she'll dump a bit of information like that. And then like just support the story along for the reader, for Duncan as well, because then obviously he gets to be a POV character to everything. He becomes like new and fresh, so she has to explain it sometimes, which works great for us. I'm totally all for that happening in stories. And so now we get to the point of the comic where we're like, oh, it's really going to expand bigger. We're talking, King Arthur, we're talking Excalibur, we're talking like, I mean, realistically, it's one of the biggest stories of all time. King Arthur, really, it's so old and it's so well known and it's so epic. Yeah. So you sort of go, all right, we get a sense of the stakes now. Yeah. 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 It's a brilliant way, and it gets you to realize moving forward in this book, you have to pay attention to like the wording of everything. That words can be sneaky and they can hide meaning and they can have clues, and you gotta pay attention and you gotta think. They're sort of like the two key takeaways. And I think doing both of those things is an exemplary way to live. Pay attention and think. I think it doesn't hurt us to do either of those. And so yeah, it's this nice kind of like wind down to the issue where basically at the end of a first issue you need to set things up in a way where the reader is like, I'm in or I'm not. And I think at the end of this, I mean, I was in. I got, yeah, yeah. Yeah, beyond anything else, it's like going to be really like cool. It's going to be just like it's going to be nice to engage with this comic and see what comes. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. And so you got to keep your wits about you. And so to have a book that that hits on all those beats, like it's smart, it's gorgeous, it's using the page well, it's setting up like nothing but really interesting characters. Like we've already got three people that we really fall in love with, and then one villain that we're still really intrigued by. Is a great debut issue. Like it's Yeah, it just sort of like adds layers to it because, like as we were saying, when like Duncan gets shot in the ear and then he still goes along with his grandma at gunpoint, you're like, well, that'll cause a bit of tension, but they're moving on with it, and they will until there's a pause for breath, and then Duncan's kind of going to be like, I'm kind of pissed that you withheld all of this from me, and there's going to be tension on a different layer later. Like it's not I don't feel like Kieran Gillen's the sort that sort of like brushes plot points aside. He's going to let them show through the characters in different ways. And I like that the character growth really does occur throughout here alongside insane like fights and cool ideas. There's still yeah, it's such a fun way to put these characters into a pressure cooker that will let you go through the high octane hijinks, but then come out the other side and have a little bit of reflection on how are they going with all of this. Yes, yeah. Mm. Yeah, yeah. You see all that unravel and you go, oh man, this whole family's messed up. Yeah. Yes, yeah. And that she had another kid. So yeah, Duncan's got this horribly evil or misinformed, or you can be both, half brother, and the insane journey that brother who's raised to be a Lancelot, like it's specifically like created with that intention, but then how that unfolds under the guidance of the horrifically demonic looking King Arthur. Just that design. Yeah. Yeah, there's no comfort to it whatsoever. Like it is, yeah, disturbing is a perfect word, and there's some real disturbing imagery sometimes in this comic. And how good is it? That's Lancelot, I'm pretty sure. It's Yeah, I thought so from memory. He's like his story is so like tragic, and yeah, they turn him into this like ghastly centaur thing, and you go, oh yeah, it gets it pretty nasty. No, because I think the latest issues will be into trade four. I'm assuming. Hmm. At the end of issue three, because I'm trying to remember which one Beowulf was. Let me just have a quick look because I've got it on here. Oh, there's a scene in the third trade actually I want to quickly mention. Um, they had resolved. Oh, there's some real maggoty stuff there. I think is it Merlin and King Arthur were starting to fight, and then it ends with them like looking up at this mountainside that's like full of weird creatures, and they're kind of just like, we'll make the best of it. And it's looking like a bunch of them have been unleashed. Oh, nice. Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 That's pretty cool. Yeah. All right. Because I was going to highlight there's a scene. It's not really spoilery at all. At the start of the third trade, the Parliament of Magpies trade, where the magpies all fly down. And I don't know, I'm not familiar with this like song or whatever it would be, but it was like one for sorrow, two for joy, three for a girl, four for a boy, five for silver, six for gold. And she's like, oh, there's the other version, and it's like sorrow, mirth, funeral, birth, heaven, and hell. And all the magpies start like saying hell, 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 hell. And they look so freaky, and the colors are so gorgeous. And so she's sitting there and just like shoots four of them. And she's like, all right, well, either way, it's going to be joy or mirth, and the two magpies are there, and so one of them just like tears the throat out of the other, so it'll be left as number one, which is sorrow. And I was like, oh man, like as a, is it a 4-page sequence? Genius. Like just like, it's probably like one of my favorite scenes I've read in a comic in the last few years. So good, so simple. Yeah, it's so funky, and like the blood is so vibrant, and everything about it is just a really cool little like, you read that sequence and you're like, all right, again, I get the tone of what's about to come. I think I get the the temperature in the room on that one. Yeah, it's just such a well put together thing. Mm, yeah, yeah, man, what a time to be reading creator-owned comics. Stuff like this landing, and it's one of those ones where, as I started reading it, I was like, I can see this being like adapted to film. And then the funkier it gets, I'm like, I mean, anything's technically possible on film with a large enough budget, but then I'm like, no, this is a comic first and foremost. Like this is really like going to like, unless you want to throw like 100 million at it, this is to be this way, to have this sort of like tone and timber about it. It's got to be on the page. It's got to be Dan and Tamara doing the art. It's the only way it works. That'd be pretty cool. Mm, yeah, yeah, because it really does offer some insane visuals. Yeah, 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 pretty much. Like the comic draws you in. Like I find it so engaging and just utterly riveting, and I'm in. Like I'm just so 100% all in on every twist and turn. It'd be hard to do on screen. Yeah. Mm, yeah. Yeah. Mm, yeah. Yeah, start to feel a bit computer generated or sort of rubbery. Whereas, and I mean, when you're dealing with something like the art and just how perfect it is, but people got to read the comic. I mean, that's it's the best advertisement for comics, man. This is the place to get a story like this. That's just mm, yeah, Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I don't know, there's always for me, there's always something to be said for, don't get me wrong, I'm all for every creator getting as much option money as they can. And if stuff goes to series or whatever, fill your boots with that sweet, sweet Hollywood gold. Um, but I don't like reading a comic where I'm like, no, this feels like a failed TV script that you've then gone, oh well, I'll publish it this way. And I feel like, I don't know, either we get less of that in comics or I just steer clear of that stuff from comics so much that I forget it's there. But I felt like a good decade ago, there was a wave of that sort of thing. And it all sort of felt like storyboards for film. And then you see stuff like this and you're like, no, this is like, this is a comic and it's not trying to be anything else. And it's specifically using this form. And that's what I love. I mean, I read and write comics because I love the medium, I love the form, I love the power that it holds. I find it so creatively inspiring, and I find it just so amazing to spend time with. And so to read something like this that's so purely a comic is just a joy. Yeah, I'll be interested to see how it's all going to come along. But have they talked about like when it might end? Yeah, 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 yeah. It's hard to tell. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I've seen Dan Moore is doing more and more DC work, and I don't know how he's fitting that in unless he was crazy ahead on this or yeah, yeah. Like there's it makes me wonder. Production schedules on these things always sort of fascinate me from a creator side of things. But I like that from memory, it launched as a mini, but they kind of knew, hey, if this goes well, we're gonna kick it on. And you can see how it could have closed as a mini, and it's possible. But how much richer everything is that they were able to go further and get trades of this out. And I love that it was super successful. It's been like a run of boom titles that really took, because it was that there was Tom Taylor's Seven Secrets and Al Ewing doing We Only Find Them When They're Dead. I remember all three of those kind of launched in similar time frames, and each of them was like more sales than the last one. And I was like, good on you, Boom. Like that's really cool to see. Yeah. Oh, at Image, yeah. That's nice. Yeah, interesting to see an independent sort of superhero story find ground. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Mm. Oh, nice. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to spend January, man. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. It's I mean, I love digital comics, but they're too easy to hide. You download it and I kind of forget. Yeah. 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 Oh man. Yeah, I actually because I just read it yesterday at Brisson's latest murder book release that I got through Kickstarter. And I love Ed, and he's a good mate. And this is a phenomenal book. But man, postage is not my friend. Like, just in the slightest. Yeah. 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 No, yeah. Yeah, yeah. It's so disheartening. And especially, I mean, for us being down here in Australia, it's I want to send my book out to the world. Super expensive. I want a back books to be sent to me. Super expensive. Like it's a tricky proposition, and I don't like it because stuff like Kickstarter, I love Kickstarter, and I love that it opens up these very personal connections to being able to put stuff out there. But I mean, I think out of the 7 or 8 Kickstarters that I've run, I've only done personally 2 that were physical. I won't count She because I didn't run that. So I didn't have to fulfill any international stuff on it. But I only did Ink Island and SkyScraper as physical copies because it's just so expensive. There it is. Ah, beauty. I've got the script for volume 2 with Chris at the moment. Yeah. Oh, nice. Thanks, man. Yeah, no, I'm really proud of the script for volume 2. I think it's better again. And I have the plot for volume 3, and the script may be on my desk this year. I'll see what other stuff's popping up, but yeah, like that's why I loved working with Comic Stripe for that one, because they would fulfill all the international orders, and then they sent me a pallet of them, and I could fulfill Australian orders, and that was more cost effective to do it that way as well. But yeah, yeah, stuff like that's nuts. But it's when you start seeing people like sending you pics where they've like opened it and they're stoked with it, like there's no better feeling. Hey, that's cool. Yeah. Yes, definitely knock on wood for you, man. No, there's an element of just like at least we can share what we do with the world. Whether it's like through a show like this, or I saw you'd retweeted it, and thank you, the little one-page writing role-playing game that I'd put up, and that was something I'd made for work. So I'm going to teach a unit on suburban horror this semester, and I was like, oh, I really want an excuse to write one of these second guest system one-page RPG things, solo journaling thing. Oh, oh, nice. Yeah, totally, man. Hey, that's cool. Oh, nasty. That is filth. I love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. I've put it up onto onto the itch site, and it's gotten a bunch of downloads in the last day and a half since it went live. And yeah, yeah, it's cool that we have this opportunity to kind of get stuff out and digitally sometimes. And you do like each time I've seen that it's been downloaded over the last like day and a half, or some people have very kindly even thrown some coins in for it because it's up for free, and I'd really rather people just get it and share the link than anything else. It does. You sort of go, oh, this is cool. It's like connecting with someone else. It's spreading around the world, and I love that vibe. And it's why when I read stuff, and why when I get stuff off Kickstarter, I like to try and like spread the word, because you want to see more people get in on the good stuff. Like that's what it's about. Yeah, yeah, yeah. 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 Well, that's it. You end up curating your list a little bit, or I feel like I do, where I'm not really disappointed too much because there's so much good stuff out. The only disappointment is that I can't get to a lot of other stuff that's probably pretty awesome too. Like I'm limited by space and funds sometimes and a bit of time. Mm. Yeah. 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 Hell yeah. Yes. Proving that while Australia is mammoth, we're a small country. Yeah. 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 So yeah, it's funny how these connections are made. That's the thing. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Breaking it down. Mm. Yes. Yeah, that's it. And that's it. We're always learning and we're always like leveling up. And I think analyzing what we dig is a great way to do it. Like it really just it's a I mean, it's better than trying to get on YouTube and start finding comics we hate and tearing them in half and pissing and moaning about what we don't like in them. Like it's not going to make you happier. It's not going to make you a better creator. It's not going to change the people who are making those comics. Like there's a whole bunch of reasons why that is just a fruitless pursuit on a spiritual, mental, creative level. Or there's like, because even through this one, I was like, man, we're really just like, and then there's this page that we love. But I was like, oh, yeah, that's why we chose this comic. And I want to know why I love these things. And I want you to point stuff out. And I want to be able to like geek out over these things. So I was like, oh, no, this is like, it's the best way to be talking about stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Hell yeah. So that's it. Yeah. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, it's already sort of it's doing all right. I think Spider-Man's going to be all right without one more show about him, but yes, hell yeah, that's always the dream. And I hope they do because God, it's a good book. Yeah, yeah, yes, yeah, 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 definitely huge win. Mhm. That's the dream. Well, I think we chose a good one today, man. It was really cool to truly just dive through it and hopefully convince some people as to why it is insanely awesome. Yeah. 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 Hell yeah. I always say just pop Ryan K Lindsay into something and you'll probably hunt me down. So whether that's Twitter at Ryan K Lindsay, whether it's Patreon/ Ryan K Lindsay, whether it's on Instagram or Facebook, which I so very rarely use for ethical reasons, whether it's the newsletter. Well, Twitter's the best one. Find me on Twitter and you'll have links to my site, ryanklindsay.com. You'll have links to my newsletter that I send out weekly where I just sort of nerd out about stuff like this and talk about my writing process, whether it is on Patreon or whether I'm trying to think of what else there would be. I guess Tumblr's not a thing anymore. I don't do TikTok or anything that's. I'm just not cool enough. Or hey, there you go. Well, sounds sounds awesome and totally out of my sphere of knowledge. So I will take it on face value. But yeah, pop those things in and track me down if you are interested in anything I've said. I'll probably say more of it somewhere online. And you can hopefully track down any of my books as well. Yeah, yeah. Hey, there we go. Nice. Yeah. Oh man, yeah, that's the thing I need to get back, in print. Um, yeah. It's still a heartfelt favorite of mine. That I will continue to have hope for more and reprints and just everything. Oh, I love it. Ah, thanks, man. Yeah. Well, one day maybe those two things will meet, but who knows? They're a good publisher. I dig them. I dig what they do. Yeah. Was it Marisi? Or was it him and Tim Daniel? Yeah. Yes. Ooh, nice. Yeah, yeah. Make it happen now. Yeah. Cool idea. Such a cool idea. I was having a chat with my kids the other day about like shared universes in film. And I was like, I'm trying to think of like, because we've been watching all these Marvel movies recently, and I was like, trying to get them to understand that like Iron Man was such a risk, and then that it went well, so they made more, and then it all tied into the Avengers. And I was like, I'm trying to think of when that had happened before. And James Bond doesn't count because it's James Bond each time, and Harry Potter didn't count. They were like, no, no, it's just the Harry Potter story. And the earliest version I could find of it was basically like the Universal monsters, and that those movies had crossover. And it's not one I'd considered before, but I was like, oh yeah, 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 and it just tanked the whole. Mm, yeah, yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah, I think they went the wrong direction, unfortunately for them. Yeah, but stuff like that, I was like, yeah, man, shared universes are nuts. And like actually kind of hard to pull off. We kind of take for granted that like comics have been doing it with Marvel and with DC for so long, but it's a tightrope. Like it's really hard. Mm, yeah, damn straight. Well, that's cool that they're doing a horror thing at Vault. I dig that. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. I like to think all the stuff I've written pretty much all exists in the same universe. And every now and then there's like a line that I'll put in somewhere where I'm like, all right, I know what that's referencing, but I have no like character crossovers. Yes. Hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Just, just planting seeds. Just getting ready for later. That's the best way to do it. I love it. I'm glad we could finally like line it up. I'm in the middle of school holidays. It was the perfect opportunity. Yeah. Yeah. Let's strike. Yes. So we've got it done. The kids have been playing and they've been fine. I'm going to go out and get my booster shot now. So I am got the day ahead planned, and then we'll probably chill out for the afternoon, see what the weather looks like. Mm. Yes, we'll keep it busy. Hell yeah. Yeah.
Microphone. I think my microphone has been turned off for a while. It was
Hmm.
working fine before.
I've heard you all right.
Yeah, in
Different
OBS.
mics.
No, in OBS Studio, something's been going weird. I wonder if
Mm.
maybe it's been recording you and not me this whole time. But no, I swear, it was recording
Mm.
me at the start.
You'll
I
have to
might,
find out on the.
I might have to ADR myself.
That would be awesome.
Oh boy, I hope not. I really, really hope not. But I might have to ADR myself.
If you do it, just don't do a good job. Like make it as like consciously terrible as you can, because I think that that's the only way. And I'd be so down for that.
Yeah, I'm
It
gonna,
would
I'm
be the
gonna put.
best.
I might have to sit here and just like read the captions
Read
and
the
ADR
captions, yeah.
myself during.
But then every now and then, just like put something else in there. Like just keep it fresh. Yeah.
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 Well, thank you, Ryan, for your time. I will ADR myself if I have to, and I will
I love
talk to
it.
you soon. Everybody, like, subscribe, follow, do all those things for both of us. If you like the show and you like this episode, please share it around, because this is funded via Patreon, and the more patrons I have, then the more of this I can make, because I can actually buy the physical comics and wave them around. Not
That's ticket.
Yeah. So until next time, this is No Capes, the show where we talk about creator-owned comics with creators who own comics. Bye for now.